Alrighty, so week 9 is upon us, and week 9 in our course is the section where you actually are going to deploy. In the learn to get, no, sorry, in the code up, the lecture, you will then walk through the process of coding up the deployment of, and really there's not a lot of code here, it's more the settings, changing over to SSH keys, creating those keys so that, and by the way, once you do this, it actually no longer makes you log in to GitHub because this handles that key. And of course, here where he's going to explore Git and set it up, you don't have to do that. We've already done that, but it's worth watching those sections. But really, he just goes over, not really, there's just a lot of things you do. When I say a lot, I actually created, and I'll just show you this, a reference file for the commands that you need to go through in order to deploy successfully to Heroku. Okay, so you're going to need to do this for your version of the email app, right? So to show you mine, that now I created a custom URL on Heroku. You don't have to. You can use their standard setup is fine. But the key is you want to, for this week, be able to deploy that to Heroku and still have it work. Okay, so I can still put in emails, right? Testing, right? So it shows, actually it's emailed to myself. Hello. Okay. So if I send that, then I get the message. And then in this case, right, so that's my create, so my C part of CRUD. And then on my read part of CRUD, right now I have this sending back just a JSON file. But one of the things I will do, and probably next week, is actually implement this into the page so that it actually has the design and it shows going through iterating. I'll use template strings to do that, just as we've already learned the concept, but I'll just show you next week how to do that. So that's what you have to do this week, right? So for the learn together, and that's why I started by showing you this section, right, is to take your output from last week that you did with creating your design, and you'll deploy that to Heroku, right? Provide a link to your Heroku, whatever your URL was. And then here's the link that I was talking about where I provide you some reference, okay? So this, and it's hard to say, but if you run into issues here, there's always, obviously, reach out to me. Andrew says in his course, you can always post in the course as well, or you could do both. But the sooner you check this out, the better. Again, this reference doesn't do in lieu of watching. I definitely recommend, because you'll have a better understanding of how to walk through that process, but this just gives you a reference. I needed this for me too, is to remember just some of the key steps to do this. So that's part 1, okay? So on part 2, as I said last week, I went ahead and drafted Dev 1. And it's a perfect time to be doing it because as I look through our course content, I realized, kind of like our Dev 0, we're going to have 2 parts. But both are going to be demonstration of skill. So in this case, you'll build a full stack version of this concept, whatever you did in Dev 0, right? Like we've done in the email app that has at least a create and read of the CRUD. By the way, you're more than welcome to attempt the other ones, but for this project, at minimum, have the ability to create and be able to read back from that JSON file. Right? You do need to have some CSS that creates a user-focused interface. I mean, that can be no more than what you saw in mine, which is just some simple, that's not it, some simple colors, right? But you also need to handle when the user doesn't give you the right data. We saw how to do that, and actually you're working on that. You worked on that as of week 8, which as of the time of this recording, you're still doing, right? Oh, let me go back. So this is So what I was referring to there, I kind of went off in a little bit of a tangent, but it's to create a user-focused interface and handle errors on input. Deploy to Heroku, right? So this is why this is a great time to be talking about this, because the work you're going to do here for this week's Learn Together will help you start thinking about it. As a matter of fact, I would say recommend it. Go ahead and do this first part, because now, and the sooner you do it after successfully doing the Learn Together, it's fresh in your memory, right? So to deploy to Heroku, your code needs to be, by the way, and know this going in, dev in your private repo under dev, under a directory called dev1. Okay, so that's where you'll deploy from. And by the way, there is a step that in the output where you actually, if you will need to change the setting to deploy a new directory. Okay, provide the Heroku directory, the Heroku URL, and a link to your private for this. And this is going to be worth 65%. So I was thinking about the second part because I was looking at where we're going to be in the course, right? So I was looking forward and I'm like, okay, so where we're going to be in the course at this point is you're actually going to be all the way through Mongo promises for the task app, right? So what I'm going to do is for our develop it, here's what I'm going to have you do is during our code review, and this is like most of you experienced, I shared my screen and we went over your code. So you will share your screen and show me that you have Mongo and Robo 3T set up on your system. And then you will write at least one query to insert a document into the database for your concept above using promises. So in this case, it's really just looking at what do I need to, because create's probably the most common one. If you're going to insert a document in order to do the rest of them, you have to do create. So I didn't say create here, but kind of makes sense. But you have to write at least one query. And you can do this in code, is to write at least one query that inserts into the database. And again, this is going to be a new database that you're going to set up. So you have to create, in this case, maybe what we want to do is create a part 1 and a part 2. I'll actually kind of play with that and flesh that out a little more detail about that. Right? Again, that uses promises because that's what you've learned, right, in this last section right here. Okay, and you're learning it in this case, and let me just say this so you contextually got this, is that when you're learning in section 10, you're writing Mongo queries against the native driver for Mongo, which is fine. And it is good to know that. And then in the next section, we actually move to using Mongoose, right? So immediately we move into using Mongoose, which changes the way we write queries. So that's why I kind of like that our dev's going to be on the native driver, because I think it is good and you will learn both. But we're going to test you on this part, see how well you have it before we move on to the last part, which I think you're just going to be moving into that section. As a matter of fact, let's go look, because I looked at that this morning. And by the way, this last part's worth 35 points. So if we scroll through to dev and we look at, because this is, by the way, right before we head out for spring break. Yeah, you're just going to be getting into section 11. So in this case, I've decided, and I'm kind of trying to do this as a standard now, is not to have the week that we're being introduced to new concepts be on your develop it requirements. Okay. So that at least gives you an idea, and I appreciate Efron asking, because it is a perfect time for me to draft these requirements for you to start thinking about them. And as I said, and I will say again, to actually do like the thing that's going to have the bigger impact right now, and the thing you've just recently learned by actually taking your concept and setting it up as a full stack app. And that's why I say full stack version of this concept. So not only can you leverage the code you've already written for the backend, right, with that modularized code you have, but now you'll create both the front end and the server. So the front end and the back end. deploy it to Heroku. I really think this is a good exercise. Actually, in this case, I'm not even asking for additional functionality. I'm actually only requiring you to do a create and a read. Again, challenge yourself if that is appropriate for you. All right, so for this week, what I want you to do now that I've covered this is ask me any clarifying question, because your questions will often help me flesh out the detail. One of the things I will do then uh, in this week is actually think about, because you will have to have a separate directory, a new project. Remember, anytime you set up a new project, the npm init is an important component. So we'll just walk through that probably next week or in the attendance. Okay, let's see. Is there anything else? I will update this to provide the video. I said I drafted the requirements. I'll go over them. Give me your thoughts and or questions regarding this work. Okay, and then I will put in the reply to 2 students. All right, have a good week. Talk to you later.